Wow. I'm thinking we could just quit right here. I don't know quite what to say. Thank you, everyone, for the creativity that you have given to worship and the word of the Lord that was spoken so clearly in each portion that we've just heard. Thank you. Throughout this biblical narrative of creation that we've just heard a portion of, we hear God's delight in his creation. He delights in all that he's done. And because we are created, Imago Dei, we too delight in creation. We delight in beauty and in creativity, but as an act of worship. We have worshiped this morning, delighting in creativity. God has placed within us this instinctive delight in creation. As Jim said in his presidential address, the beauty of God arrests us, claims us, transforms our thoughts and hearts, and then sends us on mission to transform others. Beauty is powerful. Creativity is powerful. Beauty and creativity beget worship. They are inseparable. Of course, we're inspired to worship through nature and our world around us. But what about a created work of art or a piece of music? Words. If we're truly made in the image of a creative, always creating God, what does it mean for us that creativity and worship are inseparable? I think you would agree that God desires us to use our creative gifts and abilities that he has given to us to worship him and to inspire others to worship. Our creativity, therefore, and the use of it are inseparable with worship. So Daryl quoted from Creating Dangerously by Albert Camus, and in that same talk, I did listen to it, I did read it, art cannot be a monologue, he says. Now, Camus was certainly not thinking of a dialogue with God, but it's true that creativity cannot be a monologue. It must be dialogic. We must respond to God's dangerous, vulnerable act of creating with creative, vulnerable worship.
Amen.
So, sorry, Daryl, but I've changed the title that you gave me to Inseparable: Creativity, Vulnerability, and Worship.
It's an upgrade.
It's an upgrade, okay. As I was processing this aspect of vulnerability in our creativity and then therefore our worship, was the Lord just said, this is what you need to go to. And so here we are. I love Brené Brown. And many of you have probably heard her TED Talks or read her books. And in her book on the power of vulnerability, she says, vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is not weakness, but uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. God embodies this definition of vulnerability. God is an incredibly vulnerable God, committing to risk in creating this world and all things. The uncertainty of giving people free will. What was he thinking? Covenanting with us when he knows that we'll be unfaithful. And ultimate vulnerability and emotional exposure by coming into our world as a vulnerable baby, coming amongst us as the Word made flesh, living life with us and dying our death. What was he thinking? What if his creation despised him? What if they rejected him? What if they hurt him, beat him? What if they killed him? What was he thinking? Well, we know that God's vulnerability was not out of weakness, but out of love. And because we are created, Imago Dei, it stands to reason that we too need to courageously enter into creativity and vulnerably enter into worship. How can we have the courage to be vulnerable in creativity and worship? It's quite a scary thing, quite a scary thing to share the words, to share the gifts, to share the songs that have been birthed out of our hearts, to share art that we've created. What if someone tramples on it? What if they dislike it or abuse it? But if we realize that we're not offering our gift to people, we're offering it to God, it changes it all. And as we offer our gifts to God as an act of worship, being vulnerable by doing it in the presence of people that we love, God not only transforms us, but uses us to transform others. Well, not surprisingly, after living over half my life there, I have an example from Japan. So, fairly contemporary folk artist Sadao Watanabe converted from Buddhism to Christianity when he was only 17. Watanabe combined his new faith with an interest in preserving the traditional Japanese folk art of stencil dyeing and woodblock prints. Using solely biblical scenes, Watanabe said, "My task is to stand within the artistic tradition of Japan. Theology will not take root in Japanese soil if it is merely an import." A devout Christian, he viewed himself simply as a channel through which the power of God worked, and believed that profound faith inevitably assumes the form of profound beauty. I'll say that again. Profound faith inevitably assumes the form of profound beauty. Every new print was, in the words of his biographer, a fresh discovery of beauty given by grace. Beauty given by grace. Watanabe's use of sacred art in a Buddhist context put him in a very vulnerable position. Though his work was acclaimed throughout the world, pieces hung in the Vatican and the White House, it was not embraced by Japanese, and especially by the Japanese Christian church, while he was still alive. It is now. Nevertheless, he chose to pursue his craft and vulnerably offer his creativity as an act of worship. Today, we celebrate the Feast of Epiphany, one aspect of which, as Daryl mentioned, is celebrating the coming of the Magi to vulnerably worship young Jesus. One of Watanabe's 3 wise men prints whimsically depicts them in a boat. He said that we all know they came on horses or camels through the desert, but John 2:12 tells us that, having been warned in a dream, they returned to their country by another route. Watanabe seems to have thought, what other route was there than the water? Creativity, vulnerability, and worship, inseparable. How do you and I use the creative gifts and abilities and talents that God has given us to worship Him? I'd like to encourage you to be vulnerable this week while you're here with your cohort members, with others that are here with us, and share some way that you are creatively, vulnerably using your God-given gifts in worshiping God or as an avenue to invite others to worship. Then, as we listen to each other's stories of creativity and vulnerability, let us lovingly, acceptingly, and gently, just as Christ does with us and our creativity, vulnerability, and worship, embrace each other. Let's be vulnerable with each other. Amen. And with God. Amen. Let us stand for the prayers.